Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be cracking open Atomic Habits by James Clear. You heard of this book?
I have. It's everywhere.
If you're anything like me, you've seen this book everywhere. It's a bestseller. It's been featured in major publications, even taught in colleges. But
Yeah.
is it really worth all the hype? I mean, come on, another self-help book.
Right.
That's what we're here to find out.
Well, I think one of the things that's so captivating about Atomic Habits is it doesn't promise some overnight transformation like a
Yeah.
lot of self-help books do. Instead, it kind of offers this really practical and insightful look at how these tiny changes, consistently applied can actually lead to some pretty remarkable results over time. It's like
Yeah.
the compound interest of personal development, really.
I like that. I've heard that small changes idea before, though. What makes this book any different?
Well, Clear really brilliantly illustrates this through the story of British cycling. So they were, for years, kind of considered these underdogs of the cycling world.
Right.
And then Dave Brailsford comes in, their new performance director, and he comes in with this radical philosophy of focusing on 1% improvements in every single aspect of their training.
Okay, so I'm picturing tiny bicycle bells and sparkly handlebar streamers.
Not quite.
Okay.
Think more like, finding the most aerodynamic helmets, teaching the riders the optimal way to wash their hands to avoid getting sick,
Ugh.
even bringing their own mattresses and pillows to hotels to guarantee a good night's sleep.
Wait, seriously? Mattresses and pillows? Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
That's hilarious, but also kind of genius. I never would have thought of those things.
exactly. And that's the point. So these seemingly insignificant tweaks, when they're added up over time, had this monumental impact. Within a decade, British cycling went from zero to hero, racking up Olympic gold medals and Tour de France titles left and right.
Okay, that is pretty mind-blowing. It's like that saying, take care of the pennies and the pounds will take care of themselves,
Right.
but for habits.
Yeah.
So this kind of ties into one of the book's core ideas, the plateau of latent potential, right?
Yes.
I skimmed that part, I'm not going to lie.
I think it's one of those ideas that just kind of clicks once you understand it.
Yeah.
So imagine an ice cube that's slowly warming up. You keep applying heat, but nothing seems to happen until it hits that crucial 32 degrees Fahrenheit and bam, it starts to melt.
Oh,
Right.
I see where you're going with this. It's like when you're working hard towards a goal, maybe hitting the gym consistently or learning a new language, but you just don't see those results right away.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to get discouraged and think, what's the point?
Precisely. Understanding this plateau of latent potential is like having that aha moment where you realize, hey, the work I'm putting in is making a difference, even if I can't see it yet. It encourages patience and it helps you stay committed for the long haul.
This is already making me rethink how I approach my goals.
Right.
I've definitely been guilty of throwing in the towel too early.
And-
Okay, so what happens when we push past that plateau? How do we actually make those lasting changes?
Well, Atomic Habits digs deep into the psychology of habit formation. And one of the most fascinating concepts is this idea of identity-based habits.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that even mean?
Well, Clear argues that, lasting change doesn't come from just setting goals or creating systems. It comes from shifting your identity, your core beliefs about who you are. If you don't truly believe that you are capable of change, you'll likely self-sabotage without even realizing it.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like saying, I want to be a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But deep down, you still see yourself as someone who's afraid of taking risks.
Right.
Your actions will probably reflect that underlying belief.
Exactly. But here's the really powerful part. Claire says we vote for our desired identity through our daily actions. Every time you do something, it's like casting a vote for the type of person you want to become.
I love that. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It makes it feel so much more tangible and within our control.
Right.
So it's not about saying, I want to be a writer. It's about saying, each time I sit down and write, I am a writer.
Precisely. You're literally embodying that identity through your actions. And over time, those actions shape your beliefs about yourself.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling inspired to make some changes.
Great.
But habits can be tricky beasts. How do we break down that process of actually forming a habit, good or bad?
So Clear breaks habit formation down into 4 distinct stages. Cue, craving, response, and reward.
Okay.
It's a cycle that governs all of our habits.
Ooh, a cycle. That sounds like something I could actually visualize.
Yeah, think of it like this. You're driving and you see a green light.
Okay.
That's your cue.
Okay.
The signal that it's safe to go. Seeing that green light triggers a craving, right? You anticipate getting closer to your destination.
Uh-huh.
Your response is to step on the gas pedal.
Yep.
And the reward, you move forward and you're getting closer to where you want to be.
Okay, that makes total sense. So every habit, whether it's reaching for your phone when you're bored or going for a run after work, it follows this same basic pattern.
Exactly.
But how do we become aware of those patterns, especially the ones we do on autopilot?
Well, awareness is key.
Right.
And Clara provides some really cool strategies for this. One is called the habit scorecard, where you basically just write down everything you do in a day. It sounds super simple,
Yeah.
but it forces you to pay attention to your actions and start recognizing those unconscious patterns.
I've tried something similar to that before, and it was, oh my gosh, eye-opening. I never realized how much I, like, mindlessly scroll through social media until I started actually tracking it.
Exactly. And then there's this fascinating Japanese practice called pointing and calling.
Hmm. Interesting.
So trained conductors in Japan use this technique to reduce errors, right?
Mm.
And they literally point at a signal and call out what they see. And it sounds silly, but it forces them to be fully present and engaged,
Mm.
and therefore reduces the chance of making a mistake.
So if I was trying to eat healthier, I could point at my salad and be like, I am choosing this delicious and nutritious salad.
Exactly.
I love that.
It might feel strange at first,
Sure.
but it really works because it reinforces that you're consciously making that choice.
Right.
It helps you to break free from those autopilot habits.
Okay, we've talked about awareness, but what about our environment?
Huh.
I've heard that our surroundings can have a big impact on our habits as well.
Absolutely. This is where environment design comes into play. Clear argues that we can actually make it easier to adopt good habits by creating an environment that supports them.
Okay.
And the flip side is true too. We can make it harder to slip into bad habits by removing those triggers.
This reminds me of that study about reducing bathroom cleaning costs, where they place stickers of flies in urinals, and it significantly reduced spillage.
Right. It sounds bizarre, but it worked. It proves that even subtle visual cues can subconsciously influence our actions. So, if you want to build a reading habit,
Yeah.
make sure you have a book kind of strategically placed on your bedside table where you can't miss it.
Or, if I want to drink more water, I could keep a beautiful picture filled with, like, water and fresh fruit slices on my kitchen counter.
Exactly. Make the cues for your desired habits obvious and attractive. And then obviously do the opposite for those less desirable ones.
Okay.
Right.
So we've talked about awareness and environment, but Atomic Habits doesn't just stop at setting up the right cues. It also dives into some pretty ingenious hacks
Yeah.
for making habit change, I don't know, easier and maybe even a little bit more enjoyable.
Right.
Tell me more about that temptation bundling thing that really caught my attention.
Temptation bundling, it's pure brilliance. It's all about linking an activity you want to do
Right.
with an activity you need to do. So let's say you're trying to, get into the habit of running, but you also love listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
You can make a rule.
Okay.
You only listen to your favorite podcast while you're out on a run.
That's such a clever way to, like, leverage something you already enjoy to motivate yourself. It's like a little reward built right into the habit.
And it works. It works because it plays on our brain's love of anticipation. So you start associating something that you might dread, like exercising or making those tedious sales calls, with something pleasurable, and suddenly it becomes much more appealing.
Okay, so we've talked about these individual strategies, but Clear also highlights the importance of our social environment, right? It's
Yeah.
not like we're just these lone wolves trying to build these habits in a vacuum.
Yeah, he brings up this really fascinating concept called the close circle that I think kind of resonated with me. Essentially, we tend to adopt the habits of the people we spend the most time with.
Okay.
If you think about it, if your closest friends are all super health conscious and they love going to the gym,
Right.
chances are you're going to be more inclined to join them.
It's like that saying, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, but for habits.
Exactly.
So choose your circle wisely.
Choose your circle wisely. And then on the flip side, if you're trying to, break a bad habit like endlessly scrolling through social media,
Yeah.
it might be helpful to, at least temporarily, distance yourself from people who constantly reinforce that behavior.
Right.
You know.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Mhm.
Awareness, environment, social influence. It's like we're building this support system
Yeah.
for positive change.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, even with all the right tools and strategies, sometimes just starting a habit feels like climbing Mount Everest.
Right.
What about those times when motivation just isn't there?
So Clear tackles this head on with his 2-minute rule. It's all about kind of reducing friction
Okay.
and making it as easy as possible to just get started.
Hmm.
So you break down your desired habit into a version that can be completed in like 2 minutes or less.
So instead of saying, I'm going to write a chapter in my book today, I can
Yeah.
say, I'm just going to open my laptop and write one sentence.
Exactly. The idea is that once you've overcome that initial resistance and get started, it's so much easier to keep going, you know?
Right, right.
You build momentum, and often that one sentence turns into a paragraph, which turns into a page.
I love that. It's like tricking your brain into taking action.
Right.
And it reminds me of that crazy story about Victor Hugo, the author of Les Miserables,
Oh, yes.
and how he dealt with procrastination.
He had his servant hide all of his clothes
Yeah.
so he couldn't leave the house
Right.
and was forced to focus on writing. Talk about extreme commitment.
But it worked, though, right?
Yeah.
He finished The Hunchback of Notre Dame ahead of schedule.
Right. Exactly.
It's a hilarious example of how sometimes making those bad habits harder
Yeah.
or even, like, impossible can be incredibly effective.
Exactly. It speaks to Clear's idea of commitment devices.
Okay.
These strategic choices you make in the present to control your actions in the future. So, if you're trying to save money, you could literally freeze your credit card in a block of ice.
Okay. That is genius. I'm totally trying that.
Yeah.
So we've got the 2-minute rule, commitment devices, any other, like, mind-blowing habit hacks in Atomic Habits.
Well, Clear also talks about the importance of kind of automating your habits whenever possible. Think automatic savings plans, meal delivery services, website blockers. Technology can really take some of that mental effort out of habit formation and make it more, well, automatic.
That's music to my ears. It's like delegating those tedious tasks to my robot overlords, but in a good way. So let's get real for a second. We all know that sticking to new habits, especially those with, like, long-term payoffs, can be a struggle. I mean, our brains love instant gratification.
Right.
How does Atomic Habits address that?
This is where the concept of habit stacking comes into play.
Okay.
It's about linking a new habit to an existing one. For example, let's say you want to start meditating each morning, but you're not a morning person. Instead of trying to create this whole new routine, you stack it onto something you already do, like brushing your teeth.
Okay, so I could brush my teeth and then immediately sit down for, like, 5 minutes of meditation.
Exactly. You're using that existing habit as a trigger for the new one. It makes it feel less daunting because you're not trying to, like, overhaul your entire routine.
I love these practical tips. It's like Clear has just deconstructed the entire habit-building process and given us this toolkit of strategies to actually make it work for us.
Right.
But what about those times when, we hit a wall and just feel like giving up? Any advice for, like, pushing past those slumps?
Well, Clear emphasizes the power of habit tracking.
Okay.
It's all about making your progress visible and tangible. You can use a simple calendar or an app or even just a notebook to kind of mark off each day you stick to your habit. It's incredibly motivating to see that chain of success building up.
Right. It's like you're creating this visual reminder
Right.
of your commitment and progress. It's a little like that story that Clear tells about the salesman who used the paperclip strategy to boost his sales.
Ah, yes. So he started with 2 jars, one full of paper clips and one empty, and for every sales call he made, he'd move one paper clip to the empty jar. By the end of the day, he could see the tangible evidence of his efforts, which kept him motivated to keep going.
That's amazing how powerful those visual keys can be. I have to admit, though, I've tried habit tracking before, and I always just, like, end up abandoning it. Any tips for actually making it stick?
Well, Clear suggests finding a tracking method that's enjoyable for you. If spreadsheets make you want to pull your hair out,
Yeah.
maybe try a more visual method like a habit tracker app or a bullet journal. The key is to make it feel like a celebration of your progress, not a chore.
That makes a lot of sense. It should be a positive reinforcement loop, not like a source of stress.
Right.
But is there a downside to focusing too much on tracking and metrics?
That's a really great question. It's important to be mindful of something called Goodhart's Law, which basically states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Okay, so if I'm, like, obsessed with hitting 10,000 steps a day, I might start walking in circles in my living room.
Yeah.
Just to hit that number, even if it's not actually benefiting my health.
Exactly. The key is to use metrics as a tool for feedback and motivation, but not to let them become the sole focus of your efforts. It's about finding that balance.
Okay, I'm definitely going to keep Goodhart's Law in mind as I start, experimenting with habit tracking again. Now, I'm curious about another strategy that Clear suggests. The use of an accountability partner.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
So accountability partners are like your habit cheerleaders, right? They provide support, encouragement, and a bit of external pressure to help you stay on track. Clear shares this great story about an entrepreneur, Brian Harris, who wanted to lose weight.
Oh, yeah, he made this crazy contract with his wife and his personal trainer, right?
Exactly. He outlined his goals, the actions he needed to take, and like the consequences for not following through.
Right.
And those consequences, they weren't just like a slap on the wrist. If he missed his targets, he'd have to pay his trainer a hefty sum of money. And even worse, he'd have to wear like a rival football team's hat to work.
Ouch. That's some serious motivation.
Yeah.
But it worked. He hit his goals.
Yeah.
It's amazing how powerful, like, social pressure and external accountability can be. So, finding the right accountability partner can make such a big difference in building better habits.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be anything that formal or extreme. Just having someone to check in with you regularly
Right.
can be enough to keep you moving forward.
Okay. So we've talked about a ton of strategies.
Mm.
Habit tracking, accountability partners, temptation bundling, the 2-minute rule.
Mm-hmm.
It's clear that Atomic Habits is packed with this actionable advice.
Yeah.
But one thing that really stood out to me was Clear's emphasis on, like, playing to our strengths.
Yes.
He argues that, instead of trying to be good at everything, we should focus on developing our natural talents.
Yeah.
And finding the game where we actually have a competitive advantage.
Right.
And he highlights Scott Adams, the creator of the Dilbert comic strip, as a perfect example of this. Adams admits he's not the best artist
Right.
or the funniest comedian, but he's pretty good at both.
Yeah.
And that unique combination of skills is actually what makes him so successful.
Precisely. He found a game that played to his strengths,
Right.
allowing him to stand out from the crowd. So the takeaway is, identify what you're naturally good at and then double down on those strengths.
It's like figuring out your superpower and using it to conquer the world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in Atomic Habits, but I have a feeling there's so much more to uncover.
Oh, absolutely. We've just scratched the surface.
As we've been talking about all these strategies for building better habits, one thing that keeps popping into my head is like how often we focus on the outcome we want,
Right.
but not necessarily the feeling behind it. You know what I mean? That's actually one of the, I think, most thought-provoking ideas, clear presence.
Okay.
He argues that our desire for change often stems from this deeper craving for a certain feeling or identity. So we might think we want to lose weight to fit into those genes, but what we're really seeking is that feeling of confidence and energy.
Or we might think we want that promotion for the bigger paycheck, but what we're truly after is like the feeling of accomplishment and recognition.
Exactly.
So it's like we're chasing the feeling, not the thing itself.
Yeah, and if we don't kind of uncover those underlying emotions and motivations, our habits are unlikely to stick, no matter how much willpower we muster. It's like building a house on a shaky foundation. It's just not sustainable.
This is making me rethink my entire approach to goal setting. Instead of just focusing on what I want to achieve, I need to ask myself, what feeling am I truly seeking? How do we even begin to, unravel that?
Well, Clear suggests starting with a deep dive into your values. What truly matters to you? What kind of person do you want to be? And once you have clarity on your core values, you can start aligning your habits with those values. It's like creating a roadmap for a life that feels authentic and fulfilling.
I love that analogy. It takes all the guesswork out of decision-making. If a habit doesn't align with my values,
Right.
it's probably not going to stick, no matter how hard I try. But even when we do have that clarity,
Yeah.
there are going to be times, I'm sure, when we fall off track. How do we deal with those inevitable setbacks and get back on course?
Well, first off, it's important to remember that setbacks are a normal part of the process. Everyone slips up from time to time. The key is to view those slip-ups not as failures, but as opportunities to learn and grow.
So instead of, beating myself up for missing a workout or indulging in that late-night snack,
Yeah.
I should treat it as valuable data.
Exactly. You ask yourself, what triggered this slip-up? What could I do differently next time? It's about becoming a scientist of your own habits. Right.
Constantly experimenting and tweaking your approach.
I love that mindset. It takes the pressure off.
Wow.
And it kind of turns it into this fun challenge. I like that. But let's be honest, sometimes it's not just about tweaking our approach. Sometimes we hit a wall and realize this habit just isn't working for me anymore.
Right.
How do we know when it's time to just quit?
That's where Clear's concept of what he calls the 4 laws of behavior change can be really helpful.
Okay.
He argues that for a habit to stick, it needs to be obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
So if a habit feels kind of hidden or boring or difficult or unrewarding, it's probably time to reevaluate. Maybe there's a different habit that would better align with my goals and values.
Exactly. It's about finding the right habits for you, not just like blindly following what works for everyone else. It's about finding the right key to unlock your potential.
Okay, I think we've covered so much ground today. I feel like I have this whole new understanding of how habits work.
Right. And more importantly, how to make them work for me. Any final words of wisdom from Atomic Habits before we wrap things up?
Well, Claire leaves us with this really powerful reminder. Success is the product of daily habits, not once-in-a-lifetime transformations.
Wow.
It's about embracing those small, consistent actions that over time compound into extraordinary results.
I love that. It's a call to action to start small, stay consistent, and trust the process. And if you're ready to kind of dive into this fascinating world of habit formation and unlock your full potential, Atomic Habits is definitely your guide. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.